Thank you for joining Wars of the Rosies, and this is Frederick the Great from the Encyclopedia of Freemasonry by Albert G. Mackey. Frederick the Great, Frederick II, King of Prussia, surnamed the Great, was born on the 24th of January 1712 and died on the 17th of August 1786, at the age of 74 years and a few months. He was initiated as a Mason at Brunswick on the night of the 14th of August 1738, not quite 2 months before he ascended the throne. In English, we have two accounts of this initiation, one by Campbell in his work on Frederick the Great and his times, and the other by Carlyle in his History of Frederick II. Both are substantially the same, but both are merely translations of the original account given by Biefeld in the following, or familiar letters. The Baron von Biefeld was, at the time, an intimate companion of the prince, and was present at the initiation. Biefeld tells us that in a conversation which took place on the 6th of August at Loo, but Carlyle corrects him as to time and place, and says it probably occurred at Minden on the 17th of July. The institution of Freemasonry had been enthusiastically lauded by the court of Lippe-Buckelborg. The crown prince soon after privately expressed to the count his wish to join the society. Of course, this wish was to be gratified. The necessary furniture and assistance for conferring the degrees were obtained from the lodge at Hamburg. Biefeld gives an amusing account of the embarrassments which were encountered in passing the chest containing the Masonic implements through the custom house without detection. Campbell, quoting from Biefeld, says, "The whole of the 14th August was spent in preparations for the lodge, and at 12 at night the Prince Royal arrived, accompanied by Count Wortensleben, a captain in the king's regiment at Potsdam. The prince introduced him to us as a candidate, whom he very warmly recommended, and begged that he might be admitted immediately after himself. At the same time, he desired that he might be treated like any private individual, and that none of the usual ceremonies might be altered on his account. Accordingly, he was admitted in the customary form, and I could not sufficiently admire his fearlessness, his composure, and his address. After the double reception, a lodge was held. All was over by 4 in the morning, and the prince returned to the ducal palace, apparently as well pleased with us as we were charmed with him. Of the truth of this account there has never been any doubt. Frederick the Great was certainly a Mason, but Carlyle, in his usual sarcastic vein, adds, the crown prince prosecuted his Masonry at Rheinsberg or elsewhere occasionally for a year or two, but was never ardent, and very soon after his ascension left off altogether. A royal lodge was established at Berlin, of which the new king consented to be patron, but he never once entered the palace, and only his portrait, a warmly good one, still to be found there, presided over the mysteries of that establishment. Now, how much of truth with the sarcasm, and how much of sarcasm without the truth there is in this remark of Carlyle is just what the Masonic world is bound to discover, until further light is thrown upon the subject by documentary evidence from the Prussian lodges. The question cannot be definitely answered, but what is the now known further Masonic history of Frederick? Biefeld tells us that the zeal of the prince for the fraternity induced him to invite the Baron von Olborg and himself to Rheinsberg, where in 1739 they founded a lodge, into which Kaiserling, Jordan, Mollendorf, Weiss, and Frederstraff, Frederick's valet, were admitted. Biefeld is again our authority for stating that on the 20th of June, 1740, King Frederick, for he had then ascended the throne, held a lodge at Charlottenburg, and, as master in the chair, initiated Prince William of Prussia, his brother, the Margrave Charles of Brandenburg, and Frederick Williams, Duke of Holstein, The Duke of Holstein was 7 years afterward elected Adjutant Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of the Three Globes at Berlin. We hear no more of Frederick's Masonry in the printed records until the 16th of July, 1774, when he granted his protection to the National Grand Lodge of Germany and officially approved of the treaty with the Grand Lodge of England, by which the National Grand Lodge was established. In the year 1777, the Mother Lodge, Royal York of Friendship at Berlin, celebrated by a festival the King's birthday, on which occasion Frederick wrote the following letter, which, as it is the only printed declaration of his opinion of Freemasonry that is now extant, is well worth copying. I cannot but be sensible of the new homage of the Lodge, Royal York of Friendship, on the occasion of the anniversary of my birth, bearing, as it does, the evidence of its zeal and attachment for my person. Its orator has well expressed the sentiments which animate all its labors, and a society which employs itself only in sowing the seed and bringing forth the fruit of every kind of virtue in my dominions, may always be assured of my protection. It is the glorious task of every good sovereign, and I will never cease to fulfill it. And so I pray God to take you and your lodge under his holy and deserving protection. Potsdam, this 14th of February, 1777, Frederick. Frederick did not, in his latter days, take the active interest in Masonry that had distinguished his early life before coming to the throne. It cannot be established that he ever attended a meeting after he became king, though many such efforts have been attempted. Some overzealous persons have claimed that he established the ancient and accepted Scottish rite of the 33rd degree, but the Grand Lodge of the Three Globes at Berlin, as well as many European historians, have often shown this to have been impossible. EEC. In the circular issued by the Supreme Council of Sovereign Inspectors from Charleston, South Carolina on the 10th of October, 1802, it is stated that on the 1st of May, 1786, the Grand Constitution of the 33rd degree, called the Supreme Council of Sovereign Grand Inspectors General, was finally ratified by His Majesty, the King of Prussia, who, as Grand Commander of the Order of Prince of the Royal Secret, possessed the sovereign Masonic power over all the craft. In the new Constitution, this high power was conferred on a Supreme Council of 9 brethren in each nation, who possess all the Masonic prerogatives in their own district that His Majesty individually possessed, and are sovereigns of Masonry. The Livre d'Or of the Supreme Council of France contained a similar statement, but with more minute details. It says that on the 1st of May, 1786, Frederick II, King of Prussia, caused the high degrees and Masonic constitutions of the ancient rite to be revived. He added 8 degrees to the 25 already recognized in Prussia, and founded a Supreme Council of 33 degrees, of which he himself constructed the regulations in 18 articles. It must not be concealed that the truth of these last statements have been controverted, not, however, by positive evidence, but simply on grounds of probability. Lenning denies it, because he says that Frederick had, for the last 15 years of his life, abandoned all direct and indirect activity in Masonry, and he adds that he was said to be decidedly opposed to the high degrees because, in common with many of the respectable brethren of lodges of Germany, he thought that he had saw in them the root of all the corruptions in Masonry, and the seed of all the discord which existed between different lodges and systems. But for this assertion of the king's antipathy to the high degrees, Lenning gives no authority than indefinite re-report. Reghelini says that the opponents of the ancient and accepted rite had denied that Frederick could have had anything to do with the establishment of the constitutions of May 1786, because the king, although the protector of the order, had never been either its chief or its grand master, and because it was impossible for him to have approved any Masonic regulations, since he had not been able, in consequence of severe illness, to attend to any affairs of his kingdom for 11 months before his death, which took place in August 1786. The idea that Frederick never had been Grand Master of the Prussian lodges seems to be inferred from a passage in Mirabeau's following work, which is in the following words: "It is a great pity that Frederick II never carried his zeal so far as to become the Grand Master of the German, or at least of the Prussian lodges. His power would have been greatly increased, and perhaps many of his military enterprises would have taken another turn if he had never been embroiled with the superiors of this association." Mirabeau acknowledges himself to be indebted for this remark to Fischer's following work. But I look in vain in Thorey, or any other historians of Masonry, for an account of those embroilments of which Fischer and Mirabeau after him have spoken, that Frederick did not, in his latter days, take an active interest in Masonry, which had distinguished the beginning of his reign, although he always continued to be partial to the institution, is attempted to be accounted for by the author of a German work entitled Arena. I am not acquainted with the book, but an extract from it was published several years ago by that distinguished Masonic antiquary, Giles F. Yates, in the Boston Magazine. It seems, from the anecdote there related, that General Walgrave, an officer of distinction, and one of the members of a select lodge in Berlin over which Frederick had presided for many years, had been guilty of treasonable practices which became known to his master. While the lodge was in session, the king communicated the fact that one of the brethren, whose name he did not disclose, had violated the laws of the order and of the state. He called upon him to make a full confession in open lodge of his guilt and to ask forgiveness, on which conditions, as a Mason, he consented to pardon and forgive the offense. Walgrave, however, did not avail himself of the fraternal offer, when the monarch, expressing his regret at the conviction that no Masonic sentiment could prevail even among so small a number as composed that lodge, closed it and laid down the gavel, which he never afterwards resumed, and Walgrave was subsequently punished. The author adds that from the moment Frederick had been thus forced to break the ties which bound him to a brother Mason, he ceased to engage in the active work of a lodge. But this did not induce him to dissolve his connection with the order, which, to the day of his death, he never ceased to honor and to extend to it his protection and patronage. The evidence of the connection of Frederick with the institution in his latter days, and of his organization of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, are, it must be confessed, derived only from the assertions made in the Grand Constitutions of 1786, and from the statements of the earlier bodies that had received and recognized these constitutions. If the document is not authentic, and if those who made these statements here have been mistaken or dishonest, then the proof of Frederick's interest and labors in Masonry must fall to the ground. Yet, on the other side, the oppugners of the theory that in May 1786 the king signed the constitutions, which fact alone would be sufficient to establish his Masonic character, have been able to bring forward in support of their denial little more than mere conjecture, and, in some instances, perversions of acknowledged history. Brother Albert Pike, in the edition of the Grand Constitutions, which he prepared for the use of the Supreme Council of the Southern Jurisdiction, and published in 1872, has most thoroughly investigated this subject with the learning of a scholar and the acumen of a lawyer. While unable to advance any new facts, he has collected all the authorities and has, by the most irrefutable arguments, shown that the conclusions of those who deny the authenticity of the constitutions of 1786 and Frederick's connection with them are illogical, and sustained only by false statements and wild conjecture. Brother Pike very candidly says, "There is no doubt that Frederick came to the conclusion that the great pretensions of Masonry in the Blue Degrees were merely imaginary and deceptive. He ridiculed the order and thought its ceremonies mere child's play, and some of his sayings to that effect have been preserved. But it does not at all follow that he might not at a later date have found it politic to put himself at the head of an order that had become a power, and, adopting such the degrees as were not objectionable, to reject all that were of dangerous tendency that had fallen into the hands of the Jesuits or been engrafted on the order by the Illuminati." It is evident that the question of what active part Frederick took in the affairs of Masonry is not yet settled. Those who claim him as having been, to within a short period before his death, an active patron of and worker in the order, attempt to sustain their position by the production of certain documents. Those who deny that position assert that these documents have been forged. Yet it must be admitted that the proofs of forgery that have been offered are not such as in an ordinary criminal trial would satisfy a jury. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Rosies. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.